The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the low hum of machines that monitored the comatose man lying in bed. Nurse Emma adjusted her gloves as she stood next to the hospital bed. She had been here every day for the past 3 months, performing the same routine. Bathing him. Cleaning him. Watching him breathe, yet never move, as though he was locked in a world of his own. His name was Richard Drake, a name that carried weight. A name tied to millions. He had been one of the wealthiest men in the city, a business tycoon with a reputation for ruthlessness. A crash, a devastating car accident, had left him in a coma, and now he lay in front of her like a shell, his body wasting away while his mind remained hidden behind the thick veil of unconsciousness. Emma had heard the rumors about him, the dark whispers of things no one could confirm. Everyone in the hospital had their own theory, that he knew too much about the wrong people, or that he'd been involved in something dangerous, something that had finally caught up with him. No one dared to speak the truth aloud, but there was an undeniable sense that something more than just an accident had put him in this state. And Emma, despite her professionalism, couldn't help but wonder if she was witnessing more than just a man lying in a hospital bed. Today, however, was different. There was a change in the air. It wasn't the usual exhaustion she felt after long hours spent caring for him. Something felt charged, as if the room itself had become alive. Emma rubbed her eyes, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't afford to let her mind wander. She reached for the soft sponge, dipped it into the warm water, and gently began wiping his face. It was an intimate routine, one she had performed countless times before. Her hands moved carefully as she cleaned away the remnants of sleep from his face, brushing aside the hair that had grown too long and begun to tangle. The cool water glistened on his pale skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of her hands as she worked. It was as she gently washed his neck that it happened. A faint twitch. Emma froze. She stared at his hand, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't imagined it. His fingers moved, the smallest shift, but enough to send a ripple of disbelief through her. She pulled back, eyes wide, watching in silence. The heart monitor beeped once, sharply, a noise she had heard thousands of times in her shifts, but today, it sounded different. More urgent. The low hum of the room seemed to fade away as her focus narrowed to the figure lying before her. Another twitch. His fingers twitched again. And then, ever so slowly, the slightest motion in his arm. It was subtle, so small that if Emma hadn't been paying close attention, she might have missed it. Her heartbeat quickened. Was it possible? Could he be waking up? She took a step back, unsure of what to do. The thought of calling for help entered her mind, but something told her to wait, to see if this moment was real. She had worked with many coma patients over the years, but she had never seen anything like this. Richard Drake, the man who had been in a coma for 3 months, was stirring. And then, just as her mind raced, his eyes fluttered open. The pupils dilated as they adjusted to the light. They focused on her, sharply, with an intensity that made her freeze. His gaze wasn't that of someone waking up from a deep sleep. It wasn't disoriented or slow. It was clear. Intent. Like he had been awake all along, only now he was finally willing to show it. Emma stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't breathe for a moment. She had been told that people in comas could sometimes open their eyes in response to stimuli. But this? This felt like something entirely different. "Why are you here?" His voice was hoarse, but it carried an edge, a sharpness that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She blinked, unable to form words at first. I'm your nurse. I've been taking care of you." He didn't respond, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, almost as if he already knew everything. As if he was aware of things he shouldn't have been able to know. Before Emma could speak again, he spoke, his voice even colder now. You have no idea what you've just uncovered. His words sent a chill down her spine. What did he mean? What was he trying to say? She had been taking care of him, but now it seemed like there was something more at play here, something that was beyond her comprehension. Suddenly, she felt the weight of the room pressing down on her, the silence growing oppressive. The machines continued their steady beeping, the only sound in the room now. But it was as though the entire space had been filled with an invisible force, something that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, peering down into the unknown. Richard's gaze softened for a brief moment. Then it hardened again. Get out. Emma's mind raced. This wasn't the man she had been taking care of. The one in front of her now was different. There was no hint of confusion in his eyes, no trace of the vulnerability that had once defined him. This man was aware, sharp, and there was something almost dangerous about him. She didn't move at first. Her legs felt heavy, as though they were glued to the floor. But then the command hit her, she needed to get out. She needed to get help. Something wasn't right. She turned and rushed out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she had just witnessed, but she knew one thing for sure, nothing about Richard Drake's coma was what it seemed. Emma burst into the nurse's station, her breathing heavy. I need to speak with Dr. Turner right now, she said, her voice urgent. The nurse on duty looked up at her in surprise but nodded. I'll page him. Emma paced back and forth, her mind racing. What had just happened? Had Richard really woken up? And if so, why had he said those strange words? What did he mean by, you have no idea what you've just uncovered? It wasn't long before Dr. Turner appeared. He was a tall man, with dark circles under his eyes from long hours of work, but there was a certain sharpness to his demeanor that made him stand out. He had a reputation for being one of the best in the field, but even he seemed unnerved by Emma's frantic tone. Emma, what is it? Dr. Turner asked. I think Richard Drake is awake, Emma said, her voice trembling. I was just in his room, and he moved. He spoke to me. Dr. Turner's expression hardened. What did he say? Emma recounted the conversation. As she spoke, she saw Dr. Turner's face shift. First, confusion. Then something else, something darker. This isn't possible, he muttered under his breath. He should still be in a deep coma. We've been monitoring him closely. No signs of any change. Emma shook her head. I swear, Dr. Turner. He was awake. His eyes, he looked at me like he knew something. He said, you have no idea what you've just uncovered. What does that mean? Dr. Turner's face grew pale. He took a step back, as though considering something. I need to see him. Now. The two of them rushed back to Richard's room, but when they arrived, the bed was empty. The sheets were undisturbed, the monitors silent. It was as though Richard had never been there. Dr. Turner's eyes narrowed. Where is he? Emma stared at the empty room, her breath catching in her throat. He was just here. I swear. But there was no sign of him. No sign of anything unusual. The room was eerily still, as if nothing had happened at all. Where had Richard gone? What had she just witnessed? And why was there no trace of him left behind? Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled into something far bigger than she could understand. The truth was slipping away faster than she could grasp it. And now, she was left with more questions than ever. The sterile silence of Richard's hospital room was unnerving. It was as though the events of the previous hour had never happened. No trace of Richard, no sign of any struggle, and certainly no indication of a man who had just been wide awake, speaking, and then, vanishing. Emma stood in the middle of the room, frozen, unable to comprehend what she had just witnessed. Her pulse raced as she scanned the empty bed, the neatly made sheets, and the untouched medical equipment. Everything was in its place, just as it had been the countless times she had entered this room over the past 3 months. But now, it felt wrong. The room seemed too still, too quiet. "Emma," Dr. Turner's voice broke through her thoughts. He had entered the room behind her, his eyes scanning the space with a frown. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice shaky. "He was here. I swear. He was awake. He spoke to me." Dr. Turner looked at her with concern. "Are you sure? Maybe you were mistaken." "No," she said, her voice firming with determination. "He was awake, Dr. Turner. I saw him. He looked at me, and he spoke. He said I had no idea what I'd uncovered." Dr. Turner's expression shifted, his gaze darkening. "Emma, I know this is a shocking situation, but we've been monitoring him closely. There's no way he could have woken up. He's been in a deep coma for months. His brain activity has been minimal at best." Emma shook her head. "I don't care about the medical reports. I saw him. He was alive." Dr. Turner's eyes narrowed, and Emma could see a flicker of doubt in his expression. He glanced around the room again before speaking in a quieter tone. "We need to find him. If he's awake, then this changes everything. It's not just about his recovery anymore." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What did he mean? What had she stumbled into? Before she could ask, Dr. Turner turned and walked out of the room, gesturing for her to follow. They rushed through the hospital hallways, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and fear. What could Richard have meant when he said she'd uncovered something? And why had he disappeared so suddenly? They reached the nurses' station, where Dr. Turner immediately began speaking to the other staff members. Emma stood to the side, unable to make sense of what had just happened. She had seen Richard, she had heard him speak, and yet now he was gone, vanished without a trace. "Have you checked the security footage?" Dr. Turner asked one of the nurses. "Yes, doctor. We've been looking at it. There's no footage of him leaving the room." "That's impossible," Emma whispered. "How could he just disappear?" The nurse looked at Dr. Turner, clearly uncomfortable. "There's more, doctor." "What is it?" Dr. Turner asked, his voice low. The nurse hesitated for a moment before replying, "There's no record of any staff entering or leaving the room either. No one's been in or out. It's like he was never there." Emma's blood ran cold. Her thoughts raced. No footage. No records. It was as if Richard had never even existed in that room. "We need to conduct a full search of the hospital," Dr. Turner said. "We'll find him, Emma. I promise you, we will find him." As they began their search, Emma felt a nagging sense of dread growing in her chest. Every hallway, every room they checked felt colder, more unsettling than the last. It was like Richard's disappearance had somehow infected the entire building with an invisible chill. She had been a nurse for years, but nothing had ever felt like this. They reached the hospital's main lobby, where they were met with an unexpected sight. Several police officers were standing near the entrance, speaking in low voices to hospital security. Emma's stomach dropped. Why were the police here? And why now? Dr. Turner approached one of the officers, his expression serious. Emma followed, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's going on?" Dr. Turner asked. "Something strange," the officer said, glancing at Emma. "We've just been alerted to a potential security breach. We received a tip that someone who shouldn't have been here, was spotted leaving the premises late last night." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? Who left?" The officer turned to her. "A man. Described as wearing a hospital gown, but he wasn't supposed to be discharged. We've been tracking his movements, but he disappeared before we could make contact. It was too much. Emma's thoughts were spinning. This couldn't be happening. Richard was gone, again. And now, the police were involved. It felt like the walls were closing in on her. Dr. Turner turned to Emma, his face grim. We need to be careful. Something's not right. We need to know where Richard went. Before Emma could respond, the officer spoke again. We've traced the man's last known location to a street near the hospital. We have a car waiting to take us there, if you want to come along. Without a second thought, Emma nodded. She needed to know the truth. She needed to understand what was happening. The car ride felt like an eternity. Emma stared out the window, her mind racing. She tried to piece together the fragments of the day, Richard waking up, his strange words, his sudden disappearance, and now this. The police had mentioned a tip-off, but who had tipped them off? And why? Was someone watching Richard? As they drove through the city, the streets seemed to blur. Emma couldn't focus on anything except the unsettling feeling that had settled in her chest. Something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The car finally came to a stop on a quiet street, not far from the hospital. The officer turned to her. We're here. We've been keeping an eye on the area, but we haven't spotted anyone yet. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped out of the car. The air felt thick with tension. They walked to a small alleyway between two buildings, the officer leading the way. The shadows cast by the streetlights made everything feel eerie and foreboding. They reached a dumpster, and the officer paused. This is where the tip-off came from. The person who saw him said he was here. Emma's eyes scanned the area, and then she saw it. There, hidden behind the dumpster, was a piece of cloth. It looked like a hospital gown, stained with something dark. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she crouched down to get a closer look. The officer pulled out his flashlight, shining it on the cloth. This could be it, he said. But as Emma reached out to touch the fabric, something caught her eye. Beneath the cloth, hidden in the shadows, was something else, something far more disturbing. A piece of paper, crumpled and torn, wedged between the dumpster and the wall. With trembling hands, Emma picked it up and unfolded it. It was a note, written hastily, the ink smeared in places. She read aloud, her voice shaking. Don't trust them. They know everything. They'll come for you soon. Get out now. Her heart skipped a beat. Who had written this? And why did it sound like a warning? Before Emma could process the note, she heard a sound behind her, a rustling, followed by the faintest whisper. She spun around, her pulse racing. But no one was there. The alley was empty. It was clear now, Richard hadn't just woken up. He had been running from something, or someone. And whatever he had uncovered, it was far bigger and far more dangerous than Emma had ever imagined. The note trembled in Emma's hands. She could barely process what she had just read. Don't trust them. They know everything. They'll come for you soon. Get out now. The words swirled in her mind like a whirlwind. Who was they? What had Richard discovered that was so dangerous? Her hands clenched around the crumpled paper as the weight of the situation hit her all at once. Emma, are you all right? The officer's voice snapped her out of her daze. She turned toward him, her heart still pounding in her chest. Who wrote this? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked around the alley, as if expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. The night was still, eerily quiet. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. The officer took the note from her hand, carefully reading it. His face grew serious as he glanced up at her. I don't know, but we need to be careful. This could be connected to Richard's disappearance, but it could also be a warning. Someone doesn't want us to find out what's going on. Emma's mind raced. The warning, the secrecy, it all pointed to something much bigger than she had ever imagined. What was Richard involved in? And who was after him? She had to find out. "We need to go back to the hospital," Emma said, her voice firm. "There's something more going on. Richard wasn't just in a coma. He's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "Let's go. But we have to move quickly. If someone's watching Richard, they might already know we're onto them." They hurried back to the car, the urgency in their steps matching the chaos inside Emma's mind. She had to understand what Richard had discovered before it was too late. Back at the hospital, the night shift was just beginning. The hallways were quieter than usual, the only sounds coming from distant beeping machines and the faint shuffle of nurses' shoes on the tile floor. But even in the stillness, Emma felt like she was walking through a maze of lies, each turn leading to more questions and less answers. "Dr. Turner should still be in his office," the officer said, breaking the silence. "Let's start there. Maybe he knows something." They made their way to Dr. Turner's office, Emma's heart thudding with each step. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that had been hidden right under her nose. Dr. Turner had always been professional, kind even, but now she wasn't so sure. Was he involved in this somehow? Or was he just as much in the dark as she was? They reached the office, and Emma knocked on the door before pushing it open. Dr. Turner was sitting at his desk, scribbling something on a piece of paper. He looked up at them, his eyes widening in surprise. "Emma? What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "We need to talk," Emma said, stepping inside. "About Richard." Dr. Turner stood up, his face hardening. "What about Richard?" "He's awake," Emma said flatly, watching his reaction closely. "He spoke to me, Dr. Turner. And then he disappeared." Dr. Turner's expression faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. "You must be mistaken. His brain activity has been flatlining for months. There's no way he could have woken up." "I know what I saw," Emma replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "And I found this." She handed him the crumpled note. Dr. Turner looked at the note, his face paling. This changes everything," he muttered under his breath. He rubbed his temples, as if trying to process the enormity of what Emma had just handed him. "What do you know about this, Dr. Turner?" Emma pressed, her gaze sharp. "What's going on here?" Dr. Turner hesitated, glancing between Emma and the officer before sighing deeply. "I've been keeping something from you, Emma. Something that I wasn't supposed to know either." Emma's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Turner took a deep breath before speaking again, his voice low. "Richard didn't just fall into a coma. He was involved in something dangerous. We weren't supposed to let him wake up." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? Who would want to keep him in a coma? And why?" I can't say much," Dr. Turner continued, his voice strained. "But Richard was part of a secret project. A medical experiment, if you will. He wasn't just any ordinary patient. There were people, powerful people, who needed him to stay unconscious. They were trying to keep him locked away, hidden from the world. And now that he's awake..." His voice trailed off, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. "Why didn't you tell me this?" Emma demanded, her emotions rising. "You were supposed to be his doctor. You were supposed to protect him." "I didn't have a choice," Dr. Turner said, his voice breaking. "I was instructed to keep him in that coma. To prevent him from remembering anything about what happened. But something went wrong. Richard must have remembered something important, something they didn't want him to know. That's why he disappeared. Emma felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. Richard wasn't just a coma patient, he was part of some covert operation. And now he was missing again, probably running for his life, with dangerous people after him. "What do we do now?" the officer asked, his voice tense. "We need to find him before they do." Dr. Turner looked at them both, his face pale with fear. "I don't know. I only know that Richard is in danger. Whoever is behind this will stop at nothing to keep him quiet. We have to find him, and fast." They spent the next several hours scouring the city, but there was no sign of Richard. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the note. "They know everything. They'll come for you soon." Whoever they were after Richard, and now, it seemed, they were after her, too. As the night wore on, Emma's frustration grew. The more they searched, the more it felt like the walls were closing in on her. The truth was just out of reach, slipping through her fingers like sand. But then, as the first rays of dawn began to light up the sky, Emma received a call that would change everything. "Emma?" It was Dr. Turner's voice, but it was shaky. "You need to get to the hospital. Now. I think we've found something." Emma's heart raced as she drove back to the hospital, the morning light offering little comfort. What had they found? Was Richard still alive? And what was Dr. Turner about to reveal? Every instinct screamed at her that this was only the beginning, that the worst was yet to come. The hospital was eerily quiet when Emma arrived, the halls bathed in the dim glow of early morning light. It felt almost as though the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. She could sense that something had shifted, that the air had grown heavier somehow. Dr. Turner was waiting for her outside the secure ward, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually calm demeanor was shattered, replaced by something akin to panic. "Emma, you need to see this," he said urgently, his voice tight with fear. Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" she asked, her throat dry. "It's about Richard," Dr. Turner continued, his eyes darting around as though someone might overhear. "We've found something in his medical records, something that wasn't supposed to be there." Emma followed him down the sterile corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Her mind raced with possibilities. What could they have discovered? What did Richard know that had made him a target? They reached a small, locked room at the end of the hallway. Dr. Turner produced a key and unlocked the door. Inside, a desk lamp illuminated a stack of files. On top of them was a single folder marked Project Atlas, a name that sent chills down Emma's spine. "What is this?" she whispered, pointing at the folder. Dr. Turner didn't answer immediately. He pulled it from the stack and opened it, flipping through the pages. His fingers trembled slightly as he scanned the contents. This is classified," he murmured. "I shouldn't even be showing you this, but I can't keep this from you anymore. Not after what's happened." Emma leaned in closer, her breath held. She could barely make sense of the medical jargon, but the highlighted sections were clear enough. Project Atlas was some kind of secretive, high-level initiative. There were references to cutting-edge research in neuroscience, genetic manipulation, and even mentions of memory alteration. But the most chilling part was the list of names of people who had been involved, or rather, experimented on. One name stood out. Richard Gray, it said, followed by a string of numbers, as though his identity had been reduced to nothing more than data. "What does this mean?" Emma's voice broke the silence, her mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what she was reading. Dr. Turner closed the folder, his face grim. I don't know the full extent, Emma. But it's clear that Richard wasn't just an innocent bystander. He was part of something bigger, something they were hiding from everyone. And now, I think he remembers." Emma felt her breath catch. Remember what? Richard was part of an experiment. They were testing a new procedure, one that could alter memories, erase them, replace them. They wanted to use it to create superhumans, people who could forget their pasts and become anything they wanted. But somewhere along the line, things went horribly wrong. I believe Richard was a success, and a failure, Dr. Turner said, his voice thick with emotion. A cold chill ran down Emma's spine. So, Richard didn't just wake up from a coma, he remembered everything? Dr. Turner nodded gravely. He remembered enough to be dangerous. And now, they'll stop at nothing to get him back. Emma's mind spun. They, the mysterious group behind Project Atlas, had erased Richard's memories, manipulated his mind, and created a perfect weapon. But Richard wasn't just a victim. He had become something more, something powerful, something dangerous. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft beep from her phone. She glanced at it, her heart sinking. A text message from an unknown number. I know what you're looking for. And I know you're getting too close. Stop now before it's too late. Emma's hand trembled as she stared at the message. Was this the warning they'd been waiting for? Or was it a threat, one from the very people who had been hiding the truth from them? She looked up at Dr. Turner, her mind made up. We need to find Richard. He's not just a victim anymore. He's a key to everything. Dr. Turner hesitated, but then nodded, his expression resolute. I agree. But we have to be careful. Whoever is behind this, whatever they are, has more resources than we do. They won't hesitate to stop us. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as they left the room. The weight of the situation pressed on her, but she couldn't back down now. Richard was more than just a man who had been in a coma. He was at the center of a conspiracy that reached farther than she had ever imagined. They spent the next few days combing through Richard's hospital records, his past interactions, and any possible connections he might have had to people involved in Project Atlas. But everything was a dead end. The deeper they dug, the more the walls seemed to close in around them. Then, just as Emma was beginning to lose hope, something strange happened. She received another message. This time, it was an image. A grainy photo of a familiar face. Richard's. He was standing outside an abandoned building, looking over his shoulder as if someone were following him. The message accompanying the photo was short and cryptic. Meet me here. We need to talk. Emma stared at the screen, her heart racing. It was a clue, a lifeline. Richard was alive, and he was reaching out. She showed the photo to Dr. Turner, who was standing beside her. His eyes narrowed as he studied the image. This doesn't feel right, he said, his voice low. He's leading us into a trap. We don't have a choice, Emma replied, her tone firm. We're running out of time. They gathered their things and drove to the location in the photo. It was an old, dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. The area was deserted, the windows boarded up, and the streets eerily quiet. As they parked the car, Emma felt a wave of unease wash over her. This was too easy. Richard had lured them here, but why? They entered the building cautiously, the silence deafening. The only sound was their footsteps echoing off the cracked concrete floor. The place was dark, with only a few flickering lights casting long shadows along the walls. They moved deeper into the building, but there was no sign of Richard. No sign of anyone, in fact. Suddenly, Emma's phone buzzed again. Another message. You shouldn't have come. You're not safe here. Before she could react, the building's doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Someone was coming. And Emma had a sinking feeling that they were about to discover the truth, whether they were ready or not. The air was thick with tension. Emma's heart pounded as she stared at the shut doors, knowing they weren't just trapped physically but mentally as well. They had entered a dark maze, a place where every step could lead to discovery or disaster. There was no turning back now. Dr. Turner, standing beside her, took a deep breath and whispered, "We need to find Richard before they find us." Emma nodded, her instincts screaming that they were being watched. The building was too quiet, too still. It wasn't a coincidence. She knew they weren't alone. With one last glance at the heavy, locked doors behind them, they turned and began to move deeper into the building. The floor beneath them creaked with each step, and the dim lights overhead flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with them. "You're not alone," a voice echoed through the building. Emma froze. It wasn't Richard. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The voice had come from somewhere far off, too far for her to pinpoint. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, chilling in its certainty. "Who's there?" Dr. Turner called out, his voice steady despite the unease in his eyes. Silence answered. But then, a door at the far end of the hall creaked open. Emma's pulse quickened. She didn't know whether to run toward the sound or away from it. It felt like a trap, like they had just been lured further into the web. Before she could make up her mind, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed again, much closer this time. Heavy, deliberate steps, slow and measured. They were being stalked. The hunter had become the hunted. "Move, quickly," Emma whispered, grabbing Dr. Turner's arm and pulling him toward a darkened doorway to the left. They slipped inside, holding their breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The shadows seemed to swallow them whole. The only sound now was their ragged breathing, mingling with the distant footsteps that grew louder, closer. Emma's heart raced in her chest, the cold fear creeping in as the reality of their situation sank in. They weren't just after Richard anymore. They were after her, too. Through the slats of the old door, Emma could see a shadow pass by. A figure, tall and imposing, moving with purpose. She couldn't make out any details, but she could feel their presence, a menacing energy that made her skin crawl. It was one thing to know they were being pursued, it was another to feel it. She held her breath, praying they hadn't heard her. The figure's footsteps paused for a moment just outside the door, and for a split second, Emma thought they would be discovered. But then, the sound of footsteps receded, fading into the distance. "Stay here," Dr. Turner whispered urgently. "I'll go check." "No," Emma hissed, grabbing his wrist. "They want us to split up. It's a trap." Dr. Turner hesitated but then nodded reluctantly. "You're right. We stay together." They waited in silence, listening intently. The footsteps had stopped, but they couldn't afford to be complacent. The longer they stayed in this building, the more dangerous it became. Someone, or something, was out there. And they were waiting for them to make a mistake. Minutes passed in tense quiet, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, when Emma thought she might burst from the pressure, she heard a faint sound, soft and deliberate. A door opening. She turned to Dr. Turner. "It's him. Richard." Without a word. They rushed toward the source of the sound, moving quickly but cautiously. The hall was narrow, the walls closing in, the air thick with dust and mystery. They reached another door at the end of the hallway, the faint glow of light seeping from under it. Emma's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. She hesitated. Something didn't feel right. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. But it was too late. They were already here. She pushed open the door. Inside, the room was dark, save for the dim light of a single hanging bulb. The air was stale, filled with the scent of old papers and dust. The room was sparse, almost too empty, but at the far end, Emma saw him, Richard. But he wasn't the same man she had known. He was different. The man sitting in front of her was no longer just the victim of a horrible accident. This man was colder, his eyes sharper. He was the hunter now. "Richard," Emma breathed, stepping forward. "It's really you." His head snapped up, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by something dark, calculating. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You're not safe here. None of you are." "Richard, what's happening?" Emma asked, her voice trembling with urgency. "We need to get out of here. They're after you. They're after both of us." Richard stood slowly, his movements almost mechanical. He didn't seem to notice the panic in her voice. His focus was elsewhere, on something she couldn't see. "I can't leave," he said, his voice low. "Not yet. You don't understand. They did this to me. They made me remember things that weren't supposed to be remembered." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What did they make you remember?" Richard's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the cold mask slipped. She saw a flash of fear. "There's something inside me, something I can't control. They wanted to make me their weapon, someone who could forget everything, only to be rebuilt with new memories. But it didn't work the way they planned." "What happened?" Dr. Turner asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "I woke up," Richard replied flatly, "and I remembered everything." Emma's breath caught. "Everything?" Richard's gaze darkened. "I remember what they did to me. I remember all of it. And I remember what they made me forget." "Who are they?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard turned away, his eyes haunted. "The people behind Project Atlas. They erased my memories, reshaped me into something they could control. But they failed. They thought I wouldn't wake up. They thought they could lock me away, make me their tool. But I woke up, and now I know too much." Suddenly, there was a noise from behind them, footsteps. Someone was coming. Richard's face went stone cold. "Get out. Now." He moved toward the door, but Emma grabbed his arm. "No, you don't understand. They're still coming for you. You can't do this alone." Richard stared at her with something like pity in his eyes. "I'm already too far gone, Emma. It's too late." Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed through the building, and the door behind them burst open. They were too late. A group of shadowy figures stepped into the doorway. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, and their footsteps were as deliberate as ever. "You should have listened, Richard," one of them said, his voice cold and unfeeling. "It's time to come home." The air was thick with anticipation. Richard stood between Emma and Dr. Turner, his back straight, eyes locked on the shadowy figures now crowding the door. There was no escape from this moment. No more running. The walls had finally closed in, but this time, it wasn't just a trap, it was the culmination of everything they had uncovered. The man at the front of the group, taller than the others, stepped forward. His face was obscured by the low light, but the coldness in his voice made Emma's blood run cold. "You should have stayed away, Richard," he said, his tone eerily calm. "Now you've brought others into this." Richard's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, facing the man with a determination that was almost unnerving. "I'm not going back. Not after everything I've learned. You can't control me anymore." The tall man chuckled, the sound hollow and humorless. "Control? We never controlled you, Richard. You were always a tool, a pawn. But now, you're dangerous. You remember everything, don't you?" Richard's eyes flickered, and Emma noticed the brief moment of hesitation. But then his resolve returned, stronger than ever. "I remember enough. I remember the lies, the manipulation. And most importantly, I remember what you made me do. Do you really think you can change anything? The man asked, his gaze flicking between Emma and Dr. Turner. We're already too far gone. You can't stop what's coming. Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. Who are you? What is this? What did you do to him? The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reassured her. It was a smile of someone who knew they held all the cards. We are Project Atlas. You've heard the name before, Richard. And you, Emma, you've been part of the plan all along, even if you didn't know it. You see, the truth is, everything has been carefully orchestrated. Emma's stomach twisted. The words felt like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of her. Project Atlas? She had thought it was just a conspiracy, a shadow organization whispered about in secret circles. But here it was, real and deadly, right in front of her. The magnitude of what they had walked into crashed down on her, and she felt the weight of everything they had uncovered, the lies, the manipulation. All of it was so much bigger than she had ever imagined. You're part of the plan, she repeated, her voice small, struggling to comprehend. The man's smile only widened. We never let anyone leave the project. Not you, not Richard, not anyone. You were always meant to be involved. And now, you're too deep. There's no turning back. Richard's voice cut through the tension, hard and defiant. You're wrong. I'm not part of your plan anymore. And neither is Emma. We're leaving. Dr. Turner looked at Emma, his face pale, his eyes filled with uncertainty. How can we leave? They know everything. They can track us. Richard turned to them, his expression fierce. Not anymore. They think they control us, but we're the ones who have the power now. Emma didn't understand what he meant. The odds were stacked against them. They were outnumbered, trapped, with no way to escape. She wanted to believe Richard, wanted to believe that they had some chance of survival, but the fear gnawing at her was too great. The tall man's smirk grew, as though he could sense her doubt. You can't run, Richard, he said, his voice filled with an almost sadistic satisfaction. The people you've been running from are right here. They've always been right here. As he spoke, the room seemed to shift. Emma's mind raced, trying to process the words, trying to make sense of what was happening. There was a moment of silence before everything fell into place. Richard had been part of something much larger than he had ever realized. Project Atlas wasn't just about controlling him. It was about controlling everyone, controlling memories, controlling people's very identities. The tall man stepped forward again, his gaze never leaving Richard. You're nothing but a broken tool, Richard. We made you. We gave you everything. And now, you've outlived your usefulness. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine. This man, this Project Atlas, wasn't just about power. It was about manipulation, about erasing identities and rewriting the past. And Richard had become too powerful, too dangerous to control. Richard didn't flinch, though. Instead, his lips curled into a knowing smile. You made me remember everything, yes. But you also made a mistake. The tall man raised an eyebrow. A mistake? What are you talking about? Richard's smile only deepened, a shadow passing over his features. You never anticipated that once I woke up, I'd start remembering more than just the project. I remember my life before all of this, before you erased me. And I remember what I had to do to survive. Emma's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? Richard stepped forward, standing between her and Dr. Turner, blocking their view of the tall man. I know who I am now. I know what I've done. And I know how to stop you. The tall man's expression faltered, just for a moment, but Emma caught it. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. And in that moment, she realized Richard wasn't just talking about escaping. He was talking about ending it all. He was ready to take down Project Atlas, once and for all. "You think you can stop us?" the tall man spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You can't stop what's already been set in motion. The power is in our hands, not yours." Richard turned to face Emma and Dr. Turner, his expression intense. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. We're not their puppets. We're not anyone's tools." Emma didn't know what was coming next, but she felt something shift in the air, something heavy, something powerful. The room seemed to pulse with energy, with the weight of Richard's words. And then, without another word, Richard moved. He was fast, faster than Emma could track. Before anyone could react, he reached for a hidden compartment in the wall. The tall man shouted, his voice full of rage, but it was too late. Richard had already triggered something. A blinding light filled the room. Everything went silent. When the light receded, Emma found herself standing in the middle of the room, her heart racing. The figures from Project Atlas were gone. The building, once a maze of danger and secrets, now felt empty. The only sound was her own breathing. Dr. Turner was the first to speak. "What just happened?" Richard stood in front of them, a look of quiet determination in his eyes. "It's over. Project Atlas is finished." Emma stared at him, stunned. "How did you do it? How did you stop them?" Richard didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, as though weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "I remembered who I was, Emma. And that was enough to destroy the very thing they built to control me." As the truth sunk in, Emma realized what had happened. Richard hadn't just been a victim. He had been the key. He had been the one who could undo everything, the one who could stop the machine that sought to control them all. But there was one last thing he needed to say. He turned to Emma and Dr. Turner, his voice soft but resolute. "The true power isn't in forgetting. It's in remembering. Remember who you are. Remember what's important. Because only when you know the truth can you change your fate." The lesson. In the end, it wasn't the mind-warping experiments or the manipulative control of Project Atlas that had won. It was the simple power of truth. Richard had fought not just for his own freedom, but for everyone's freedom, for the right to remember, to be who they truly were. The lesson was clear: no one could ever truly be controlled unless they allowed it. And the truth, no matter how painful, would always set you free.